Ladies and gents, joining us this evening is club historian of Glasgow Rangers, David Mason. David joins us in the first episode of Club Stories, where we look at some of Scotland's biggest and well-known teams, and where else better to start than the newly crowned, Scottish champions of Rangers. David, thanks for joining us tonight, mate. How are you doing? And how are your celebrations for you last weekend, mate?
I'm still celebrating. I think we'll be celebrating for a wee while now. Especially if we win tomorrow night and then at the weekend as well. But no, I'm doing well, guys, and thanks for inviting me on. It's always a pleasure to take part in these sort of things. So it helps to fill in my day as well. So it's good.
That's it, mate. That's it. Like I said, me, myself, Scott, two big Rangers fans. So it's not only be excited, but it's a bit of an education, because I think a lot of Rangers fans who they think the club and stuff like that, but I couldn't tell you a lot of things about the kind of Bill Struess, Scott Simon and stuff like that as well. So we're absolutely buzzing to have you on and just kind of pick your brain and learn a bit about the club and history and stuff like that as well. Just start off for yourself, mate. What was your kind of upbringing as a Rangers fan? What's your earliest memories? Who your kind of players as you kind of seen as your heroes growing up?
Yeah, well, I'm just like you guys, just a wee bit older, but but the same as you, I'm a fan, and like even some of the players as well, they're fans as well, and you start off at that level, and I've been a fan since I can first remember, and probably going back to until I first remember, I would be maybe about 5 or 6 as a fan. I was told my father took me in as a baby and to watch Rangers against Third Lanark one time in a game, and also at Firhill, Rangers against Partick Thistle. We lived in Maryhill at that time, so I got taken in there. I would probably be 2 or 3 or something like that. But the first big games I remember were two games at Ibrox, and then the 1964 Scottish Cup final when I was 8. And that's what you'll tend to find, probably like yourselves as well, when you see a big victory, when you see a cup victory or a championship or whatever, it consolidates your love of the club, and that's why last weekend, you probably don't think too much about it because you've been fans for a wee while, but there'll be wee 5, 6-year-old kids, even my wee granddaughter who's 3 was going about shouting in Alexa to play Rangers music. So these are the things. These are the things that stick in your mind, and that's really you probably after last weekend it probably launched off a new generation of fans.
Aye, like you said, mate. I think you just kind of bring back memories myself. I grew up in the 90s, 9 in a row, and like you say, I think my first game was it's a Tuesday night, and it was the 9 in a row season. St Johnstone at home Ibrox sitting up in the Broomland end, and the kind of first memories I remember is kind of Gazza running about with his blonde hair and stuff like that, and that was obviously in the kind of most successful year of the club, and even just things like Kieran Tina Turner come at start of the game, stuff like you said. These memories kind of start off and live with you the rest of your life.
They do.
Sorry, there you go.
And what I was going to say, and that's where I started. So I started as a Rangers fan, obviously. I'll not get into the details of how I get involved, but mainly because it's too long. But essentially it came 1986. The club were planning a museum, and it's going to come full circle now. But they were planning a museum in 1986. I'd handed in some stuff that belonged to my father. My father was a fan going back a long time as well. Didn't hear anything for the club. Called them up to find out what had happened to it. There had been a couple of directors had left the club at that time, and one of the directors had been given the responsibility of being like the curator of all the stuff that had been collected. So, and my dad's stuff was in amongst that. So when I spoke to Campbell Ogilvie, the secretary at the time, I said, look, you don't want this stuff to be lost because he's had it for a long time. Campbell explained that story. He says, no, we're looking for somebody to do this, to look after this stuff and help us going forward with the historical side. And it was a throwaway line. I said, well, I'd be happy to do it. Not really expecting him to say okay. But he did. And then what happened after that was it just gathered, arms and legs. I was asked to do bits for the programme. I was asked to answer some letters. I've done TV, video, radio, all sorts of things over that period of time. It just gathered the momentum. And then and the more and more you get involved in the club, as you said right at the beginning, you'll not know a lot about Struth, for example, or whatever.
Yeah.
The more and more you get involved in a club, the more you realise how special a club it is. And even though I've been involved now for since 1986, 35 years, even though I've been involved through that time, every time I look at stuff in the club, I learn something else. I mean, I literally, that's not just a throwaway line, that's just a matter of fact. I'm always finding new stuff and speak to people who can throw in something new. So it's just, it's just such a fascinating club, and grew through a fascinating period in time, and obviously now one of the greatest clubs in the world.
Aye, without a doubt. Like you say, I think that's one of the great things about this club, because you do keep learning about the club and all the history and stuff like that. Like I remember, relevant to this show in particular, I done the Founders Trail about 10 years ago, I think it was. It took in the kind of open bus tour and different kind of landmarks and stuff like that, where kind of people from the club back in the day grew up and where the club was formed and stuff like that. Was it the cricket club where they played the first game, stuff like that, all that kind of things. And I think that was when I was kind of getting into my 20s, and I was kind of learning more and wanted to learn more. And then obviously what happened in early 2012. But in terms of the club, David, we'll go back to the start, the very, very start. And we've all heard the song of Four Lads Had a Dream, stuff like that. We've all heard different myths and legends about the club, how it began. How did Glasgow Rangers come about, and what was the story there?
It's quite an involved story, because it really, I think one of the great things about Rangers is Rangers mirrors the history of Glasgow to a great extent, and also the history of football, because football was played for hundreds and hundreds of years, even in Glasgow. Down at Glasgow Green, it was played for 400 years. So people always understood football, but what they understood by football was not what you understand by the game. What you see and what we recognise now as football or soccer now is what they call the association game. And that was when they developed rules that were specifically organised, and that was organised and formalised in 1863. And then after that, there was a Scotland-England match took place, a few actually prior to 1872, but the first big one was 1872. Queen's Park were formed in that decade, in the 1860s as well, 1867 I think it was. So things were starting to emerge with football. People were getting really interested, they liked the game. And our boys, if I call them our boys, were keen in rowing. They used to row down the Clyde, down at Fleshers Hall, which you've been at, which is not anything like the way it used to be, because it was about 5 metres lower than it is at the moment. And there was a sandbank on the river. So these guys used to pull their boat up there and walk up onto Fleshers Hall, and they watched some games taking place there, and they thought, I like that. That's quite interesting. Like to take part in it, and then it really kind of all followed on from there. They took part in some games and then decided, why don't we form our own football team? And they were walking in Kelvin Grove Park, and decided, let's get a team together. Let's, what will we call it? And they went through lots of different names, and then they eventually ended up at the Rangers. And the reason they ended up at the Rangers is because they all came from Argyll. William McBeath actually came from Callander. The other three came from Argyll. And they felt they were strangers in Glasgow. So they felt, because they're strangers, Rangers is fitting. And one of the guys, Mosey McNeil, had seen that name in a book, a football annual. So that's the kind of background to it, and they just gathered momentum from there.
So one thing I'm fascinated about, David, it's the strips. So how did it come? We've seen the old photos of the kind of white stuff as well, and the kind of the crest that was, I'm led to believe, from a Jewish kind of heritage. How did it come from that to the blue, white, and the black and red socks that we know today?
Well, they didn't. That jersey creates a lot of confusion, because it's the earliest picture we've got of the team, and they were wearing that white jersey with the blue star. The blue star, we're not absolutely certain about the background to the blue star. The Clyde Amateur Rowing Club had a blue star as its symbol, these don't look like rowing jerseys. The team that we probably got our name from is the Swindon Rangers as well, and they actually had a white jersey with a blue star.
Right.
I don't know, just possibly by coincidence, but we feel that they possibly never ever wore that jersey. The jersey we started with was a royal blue jersey. That's it. And apart from a period when we wore blue and white hoops, because we were the first team to wear the hoops, of course. apart from that, we've always worn blue, royal blue, or various shades of blue. So that's the background to it. So yeah, that jersey kind of throws a lot of people. We think it's our first. People think it's our first jersey, but it wasn't.
Aye. So we'll go into the kind of football, David, now, and the characters as well. First manager I've got on record is William Moulton, winning eight league titles, one Scottish Cup. I've got that right. But he ended up managing.
You're obviously reading that, Curtis, eh?
Listen, I've got it down. I've got it in front of me to make sure I've got it. I've got it. Like you fact checked him. But like we say, he managed the club for nearly 21 years. These kind of numbers we're going to talk about, the managers and stuff like that, is crazy compared to the day. You barely get 2 or 3 years in football. But there's the kind of early Rangers like, and the kind of success they had.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, he was the first manager, but he didn't become manager until 1899. The club had been going for 27 years before that. And the reason he became manager is because the club became what they call incorporated. It became a limited company at that time. And so when it became a limited company, you needed a manager. Prior to that, you had a match secretary or a secretary. And William Moulton was a secretary. So it was just a transition, a normal transition. His title changed, but probably a lot of things he was doing prior to 1899 were the same as when he took over the manager's job as such. But the manager's role has changed over a period of time. I mean, right from the very start, there would have been guys in there who were taking more responsibility for organising the pitches and things like that, organising the games, picking the team. So you had that right from the beginning, but the first manager as such was William Moulton. And he came in 1887. 1883. And so he was a big character. And the reason that Rangers are where we are just now is because of a number of things, but mainly because of the characters we've had. You know what it's like. If you ever try to set up your own football team, you maybe done it a couple of times and it lasts for 6 months, even if you're organising 5-a-sides. Unless you're actually going to have somebody who's dedicated to make sure that happens, it just falls by the wayside. And a lot of football teams did disappear because they didn't have that impetus. But we always had people right through the club who were very focused and very ambitious and very organised. And that's why, and then it just gathered the momentum and we had more and more people coming to watch us, and we were pretty decent from an early stage as well. So it's William Moulton was one of them. He's possibly one of the most important characters. In fact, certainly one of the most important characters in the history of the club.
Aye, I think what you just said there, David, kind of backs up the fact that we talk about the kind of the length of the time these guys had within the club, because you've not got to stay in a club 20, 30 years if it doesn't obviously mean something to you, but you're going to put everything into it. I think that kind of clarifies that kind of point, like you said.
Yeah, but the thing is, I mean, you'll know from other clubs, I don't even necessarily football clubs, but any kind of clubs, they'll have like a committee, and then they'll have a chairman or a president or something like that. And sometimes when you've got a really good one, then a lot of things happen, or like a captain of a golf club, or if the guys can't be bothered, then it all just kind of falls by the wayside. So the fact that Rangers had William Moulton in a fairly senior position from the late 1880s going into the 1890s right through to 1920, he's the guy that really built up a lot of the traditions, a lot of things. When we get into Ibrox, we've got to be well dressed, we've got to have a tie on, we've got to be, your shoes polished. You see Stephen Gerrard standing in the touchline, always very, very smart. Coisty went through a wee spell where he put on a tracksuit you know.
Aye, I noticed that. Aye.
And they get pilloried for it, and they went back to the because we've got standards at Rangers, and a lot of these started with the likes of William Moulton. So,
aye. So we're going to probably one of the most iconic men Rangers history anyway. Obviously, the famous Bill Struth. Dave, you've obviously wrote a couple of books with obviously the Rangers managers, but also you wrote one on Bill Struth. And again, like you've always heard the kind of famous speech to put on kind of YouTube videos and stuff like that, and that he's meant to have said and stuff like that, and just the kind of presence of him is still in the club and will always obviously be there. Not only in the name of the stand, but you've also got that picture in the trophy room, the oil painting. Can you just give us a wee bit of background on Bill Struth, the man, and Bill Struth, the football manager for Rangers?
Yeah, it was one of the most interesting parts of my time at Rangers when I get really heavily involved in the research of that, and I did it with a chap called Ian Stewart, a good friend of mine called Ian. So Ian Stewart. So we really got into understanding a lot about him, and part of it came through knowing family. You know, his granddaughter is still around, and we got a chance to speak to her. But probably the most important character was a woman called Alison Dallas. And her mother was Bill Struth's secretary. And she was actually virtually brought up by Bill Struth. Right, for 25 years, she basically lived at Ibrox. So I got a lot of information from her, what he was like. He actually stayed with their family towards the end of his life as well for a long time. So I got a lot of personal information about him. But the more and more I understood about him, the more impressed I was by him. You know, and he had his moments. You know, he wasn't a perfect man by any stretch, but a very, very important character in the history of the football club. And of course, I've known through that period a lot of players that played under him, like Johnny Hubbard and Ian McCall prior to that, and you know, Billy Simpson, and even Ralph Brand was signed by him, and Jock Shaw, you know, Bob McPhail, all these people I spoke to in the past. And they were telling me their feedback, and every one of them, without exception, had great respect for him. He was an athlete, basically. He wasn't a football player.
All right.
And he came into the club at a time when there was a trend for athletes to get involved in training because they wanted to get football players fitter than they had been. And he started off with Hearts and then Clyde, and then Rangers attracted him. And then it was just by chance that William Moulton had died in a boating accident in 1920, and Bill Struth stepped into the position, but he hadn't planned to take over that role. It just kind of fell in his lap. But he was there, you know, after that he was there, manager for 34 years, and again, just continuing all these great traditions of William Moulton and beyond.
Like you say, I think he not only carried on traditions, but he carried on success. Was there anything that, like you say, obviously you're an athlete and stuff like that, but was there any kind of authoritative as a manager? Because I get you say he drives the standards, drives the tradition, but was there anything that he maybe kind of, I don't know, forced upon the team, forced upon the club? Because like you say, these traditions up to the very day, standards, the suits, was that Bill Struth?
You know, it was William Moulton. It went back to William Moulton, but Bill Struth was a very smart guy himself. They used to call him the Beau Brummel of football. He used to keep suits in the manager's office and change into these sometimes twice different suits twice a day. So he was anytime you see pictures of Bill Struth, he's always immaculate. But in terms of, you know, what he brought to the club, he did. Again, as said earlier on, managers then were different from what you get now. You know, you get the likes of Stephen with his big backroom team of Michael Beale, you know, and all the individual coaches within that group as well, and Gary McAllister, of course, as well. So it's very much a team, very tactical in the way they approach things. But at the time when Bill Struth was there, and some of the managers after that, they just used to pick the team and then put the team on the park, no tactics, and then leave it up to the players to work it out themselves. And generally, that's what they did. You know, they would see where, you know, there's maybe a problem, a weakness, or whatever, and they would make the adjustments themselves in the field. But but he set standards. They used to say he ruled with an iron fist inside a velvet glove. They knew where they stood with him, but he also got their respect because he looked after them. So he was a big character and a father figure in many regards.
Mm-hmm. So like you say, his legacy will live on forever at the club. He wins 18 league titles, 10 Scottish Cups, two league cups. But then I'm led to believe Scott Simon was his assistant when he took over. Was that right when Scott Simon took over Rangers?
No, he wasn't his assistant.
No.
But if I just go back to what you said a minute ago, 18 league championships. Yeah, he did win 18 Scottish First Division championships. But remember, he won through the Warriors as well.
Aye.
For the first 9 in a row that we talk about. So he won 9 successive championships. He won them through the Warriors, Southern League. So when you add that on, that's 25 championships he won in 34 years. Huge dominance.
Aye.
And they'd have won more Scottish Cups if that had been played as well. But no, to get back to your question then, Scott. Scott Simon was one of his players. He had become after he left Rangers, he became manager at East Fife and then Preston, and he took Preston to cup final, took East Fife to cup final. I think won League Cup as well with Preston, with East Fife. So he was as a provincial manager, as we call him. He had made great strides in the game, and when Bill Struth decided that it was time for him to move over, he recommended that Scott Simon get the job, and that's the kind of background. So, but again, the likes of Scott Simon and Willie Waddle, for example, being Bill Struth men, they carried forward all the traditions of Bill Struth when they took over.
So you mentioned Willie Waddle there, mate. We'll come on him in a bit, but after Scott Simon's success that he carried on from Bill Struth, the club went through a bit of kind of barren spell in terms of trophies and in terms of success. Was that down to anything? Was it maybe the fact that we're competing with a Jockstein Celtic or the rise in kind of Scottish football at that time? Or was that a slip in standards? But was there anything to contribute to the fact that maybe that success was falling away from the club?
Well, what tends to happen, and you've seen it with Celtic this year, is that whenever a team loses ascendancy in the Old Firm, one of the two, then there's fallout. So if you're second's nothing in Glasgow, and so when you start to slip, then it puts you under pressure, and in these circumstances, then the fans get very agitated, the board gets agitated, and unless there's some evidence that you're actually building towards something, which obviously there was in Stephen Gerrard's case, then you don't have a lot of time.
Aye.
And in Scott Simon's case, Celtic were on the rise. Jockstein had come in there. They'd started to win championships. They'd won the before the European Cup. We were starting to slide a little bit, but we were still top of the league when Scott Simon was dismissed. But the writing was on the wall from him. We could beat off of Berwick in the first round of the Scottish Cup, and then which was one of the worst results in their history. Progress Niederkorn was probably worse than that, but that's what happened. So he just became under pressure. The fans get agitated. I can remember I was because back into my era, pressure was building up. We lost the Cup Winners' Cup, which is ridiculous, because we had we'd got to a final in Germany against a German team, Bayern Munich, and lost it in extra time. We should have won it. We had a goal disallowed. It was a good goal. And we didn't play with strikers because the board had decided to get rid of our 2 strikers after Berwick. So he was very, very unfortunate, Scott Simon, and latterly not given the time that he needed. But there was a kind of trend in football at that time where they were looking for what they call a track-suited manager, and so that was the end of Simon and introduction of Davy White, who was his assistant.
So we'll fast forward back onto the success of the club, and William Waddle comes in, as you mentioned, another kind of Bill Struth man, as you mentioned, Davy. He didn't manage to win a league title, but he landed the European Cup Winners' Cup triumph that probably the greatest achievement of Glasgow Rangers. Can you tell us a bit about that kind of journey of the Cup Winners' Cup and how it came about, and even if you've got any memories yourself of the kind of night in Barcelona and how that was?
Yeah. Basically, what happened was Willie Waddle didn't want the job. He didn't want to. He'd been manager of Kilmarnock. He'd won the championship with Kilmarnock, and within a few days he resigned because he didn't want to be a football manager as such. He was a sports writer for one of the majors. So that's what he wanted to do. But he felt the standards had slipped at Rangers to an extent that there was a calling there to sort it out. So that's why he went in there. But the fact he only stayed, for 3 years, less than 3 years, is an indication of why he just wasn't really interested in that. But what he had to do initially, in his mind, and probably right, is he had to get the fitness of the players up. He had to make some important signings. The good thing from David White's point of view is he'd already made some really good signings, like Alan McDonald and Colin Steen, and had a lot of great players already at the club, like Sandy Jardine and who was starting to emerge, Willie Johnson, people like that. So he started to look at what he had, make a couple of changes. Baxter and Henderson eventually disappeared as well. But wee Willie, before he left Rangers, had been an important part of the Cup Winners' Cup run. Scoring the goal that took us through as well against Sporting Lisbon. So at that time, he didn't think we had the consistency we needed to win a title. Again, we're kind of building towards it, but we could beat anybody on a day in a cup competition, and that's essentially what he did. Brought the League Cup to us for the first time in 4 years, 1970, and then after that, as you say, the Cup Winners' Cup, which was the biggest result in their history.
Aye. You must have been a wee kid. You must have been about 10 or 12, or maybe younger than that, David.
Yes, I was a wee bit. No, I was a wee bit older than that. No, 72. 1970, I was 14. So that was my
watching the game.
That was my first Old Firm game. I wasn't allowed to go on, and my father didn't want to take me because it was. There was a lot of trouble around these times, and I was desperate to go. And then eventually relented and said, "Okay, we'll go to the League Cup final." There was a lot of trouble there as well, but not really involving us. More up at Celtic end at the park, because what you used to get is if there was any trouble, there'd be a big gap opened up in the terracing, and that was one of the things that stuck in my mind. I was right behind the Rangers end, and after we took the lead, they started fighting with themselves, and this big gap opened up right in the middle of the Celtic end. So there was a bit of bother then, but yeah, that was my vintage. And by the time Barcelona came round, I wasn't allowed to go on my own. I was 16 at the time. My father couldn't go because he was working on his own at that time. So I was still at school, and I can remember it was a delayed transmission. It wasn't live in the telly. It wasn't shown until about, I think it was about 10 o'clock at night or 10:30 at night, or maybe even later than that. And we actually had a school dance that night. End of term thing or whatever. And I remember we were getting flashes, of the result. And the last result I heard was 3-1 to Rangers, and we'd won it. And I thought, that's great. So I'm sitting watching highlights, quite relaxed about it, and thinking we won 3-1. And of course, towards the end, it's getting quite fraught. And then they score a second goal, and I think, wait a minute, the game wasn't finished. I've told we won it. So for the last 2 or 3 minutes, I was like everybody else, because I didn't know what the score was, and I was panicking. So I was kicking every ball, but of course, it was a great result for us.
Aye, like you say, I think we've all seen the scenes of pitch invasion and stuff like that. Even we all know the story in terms of getting the trophy inside the stadium, stuff like that. John Gray was presented it as a bit of a great shame, because I think that's as a football fan, first and foremost, that iconic thing you always remember is the kind of trophy presentation and stuff like
that. Yeah.
It's a real shame. In terms of European nights in general, David, have you got a favourite in general from over time with Rangers? You get any Any favourites?
No, I don't have any favourites.
No.
A lot of big memorable ones, and I think my most memorable away one was against
Right.
Marseille. Marseille.
Is that Ian
Because
Durant one?
because Marseille were a great team. They went on and won it. Although eventually there were found to be a lot of things happening behind the scenes with Marseille, but they had a great team, and we were unbeaten through that whole campaign. But no, that was great. The atmosphere in the stadium was brilliant. I thought we played brilliantly that night. Because they had so many great players. So that one stands out in my mind. We played Dynamo Kiev back in the 80s as well. Again, we needed a 2-goal victory. And did we need two? I can't remember what the score was in the first leg. Did we lose 1-0? But the atmosphere in the stadium was just as good as I've heard it. When we scored the winning goal, it was colossal. But European nights, even against Ajax and the centenary nights and whatever, seeing Johan Cruyff. Now we lost these games, but again, seeing players of that standard. So I was losing to who was it now? Valencia with Kempis playing. Who was one of the Argentinian stars, super player. So there's just so many great European nights. Hopefully, we keep this run going.
Hopefully tomorrow it's weather, mate.
Aye. I mean these the run's been superb. It's just a pity we've not had fans in the stadium to really enjoy it.
I know. Like you say, at least hopefully next year we get carried to the Champions League to hopefully go and qualify now. But again, don't get too high. They've hurt themselves now because good tomorrow night negotiate as well. But like you say, it's just good now after what the club's been through the last decade, especially we're getting to see these great players and teams back at Ibrox.
Even a simple thing like and I've talked to a lot of the players over the years as well, and what they enjoy is even the music. That Champions League music.
Aye, that's it. That's just goosebumps in it, man. Even just seeing that Ibrox.
I remember when Michael Moles got injured. When he got injured in Munich, and then when he came back, I can't remember what game it was, but his first game back in Europe, and the camera was panning along all the players, as they do at the start, and Michael was standing there with a big smile on his face, smile on his face, and he was just, you could tell he was just so delighted to be back in that environment again. And I think that's what we all miss. We've not heard that music for a while.
Exactly. I think again, just talking Champions League, I remember again when I was growing up, I remember my dad taking me to the Dick Advocate era when we had the kind of Michael Moles and stuff like that as well. My first Champions League game, I think it was Bayern Munich won each at Ibrox. Albert scored. Yeah, that's always my kind of like the memories of Champions League. But again, hopefully that's not too far away in the future, David.
Yeah. Just getting back to what you were saying right at the beginning. The thing is, every fan, you ask that question to every fan, and they'll all have different ideas. I mean, I was down at Leeds, for the Battle of Britain one as well, and that that was iconic game as well. There's other games that feature in there, but every fan you ask will have a great game, whether it's the Fiorentina one, whether it was even down in Manchester, or whatever. And that's the thing about Rangers, about the club. So many great nights. There's somebody out there who's got a specific one that they like for a particular reason. So,
can I just ask you about the Leeds game since you've mentioned that? I was under the impression it was the Rangers fans down there, but I take it there have been fans going down there sitting themselves or whatever. Would that not have been quite a tense situation to be in, sitting at yourselves in Ellen Road?
It was funny actually because the thing is, we had been told. I didn't get down with the club. We'd been told that if any of the staff travelled, it would be instant dismissal. So I was. I'm not full time at the club, as you probably know. So I was doing some work with a company that were based in Leeds. And after I had a meeting with the guy, and then just after the meeting, I throw away a line. I said, "You wouldn't, by any chance, able to get a ticket for Ellen Road?" And he said, and he just paused. He just paused, and then he looked at me and he says, "Why would you want to go?" I said, "Absolutely." He said, "But you're not supposed to travel." I said, "No, but leave it with me." Then later on that day, I got a phone call from one of the senior guys in there saying, "Right, I know they want to go. I've got a ticket in like the equivalent of their member suite. It was called the Club Lounge or something like that."
Aye.
He says, "You can come with me," but he said, "But you have to, they're very strict. You can't, stand up and cheer or whatever." So I said, "No, don't worry." I said, "I'll be." I mean, I can remember I actually said, I'll be like a mouse right through it." And I remember sitting there, and before the match, we're sitting with all his friends and having a chat, and they knew I'm a Rangers fan, so it was quite open in there.
Aye.
And of course, if you recall what happened in that game, Mark Gately scored in the first minute.
Mark Gately, aye, and McCoist as well, didn't he score there?
And I was sitting in my hands. I didn't jump. I didn't say anything. And but I did watch people popping up all over the ground, and they were all, as soon as they popped up to cheer, the police were in. People were pointing them out, and they were going to hold out and swear in the crowd.
Oh, really?
So they were all over. Our fans were all over the place. You would just see them popping up, and then it would just cause a bit of disturbance in that part of the ground. But after it, after Mark's goal, I was elated, obviously, and I just turned to the guy. I said, "You've got to admit, it was some goal." But then, but the nice thing about it for me was a half time, and we were well in control of the tie by that time, and they were talking about how good our team was and how good Ian Durrant was and how good So they were fulsome in their praise of Rangers, and it was just nice. And I drove up that night, and it was just lovely, just a very pleasant drive up the road.
I can imagine. There was some team, like you said, that would have been the unbeaten team as well. So, like you say, it was some team, David. Go back to William Waddle again, and we'll talk probably about the darkest kind of times of the club. We'll talk about the Ibrox disasters. I think everyone, it's well documented the sadness it caused the club. On a personal level, I've not had any family members directly affected. I've got a good friend from Penilee, Mark Dickey, who's from the Nelson family.
Yeah.
And then he's got his granddad's brother's headstone in Creighton Cemetery, who he lost in the 1970s one. And obviously we had the kind of memorial there for the 50th anniversary and stuff like that. But can you kind of encapsulate, probably also from a personal point of view and the club's point of view, how it maybe kind of shaped Ibrox Stadium after that, and how it maybe changed maybe even British football?
Well, I was obviously I wasn't working at Ibrox at the time. I was only 15 when that happened.
Aye.
One of the chaps I knew pretty well, he was killed in it, and a girl I was at school with, her brother was killed in it. And as it transpires, I actually know I knew one of the other guys. I didn't know him that well, but I knew of him. So there was four. I lived in Kirkintilloch at that time, and so there was four guys from Kirky had died. And I think the thing for me over the years is that you start to understand you hear all the personal stories, because everybody talks about when they left, when their loved one left, the circumstances of them not coming back and all that kind of thing. So just so much tragedy in that whole situation, and not just the people who died. The people who were injured. It left a scar with a lot of them as well. So you're talking about hundreds of people that were impacted, affected by it. I would say in these circumstances, if you're taking priorities, the A are all at the top, and the club's a way down at the bottom. The club is. But when you do come to the club, and again, having spoken to a lot of people who were involved in it, the thing that struck me is the likes of John Gregg. I went to the guys made a memorial bench for the four that were lost in Kirky, and I went there for the dedication of that with John Gregg. And John's quite bubbly at times and good fun. And other times he's quite morose, whatever. But the thing he did say constantly was just young boys, just young boys. So any time it arises, I always see with John Gregg how deeply cut it was with him. And then, of course, the other thing as well is you'd a lot of players. One of my good pals is Derek Parlane. Like I said, Derek Parlane, Derek Johnson, Alfie Cohen, young boys. Some of them never even been to a funeral, and then having to go to all these funerals where people are looking at them. So if that had happened nowadays, there would have been a lot of counselling for people involved in it, especially within the club. But there was no counselling at that time, so it did scar them. It scarred a lot of people in the club. But of course, the big thing was the families, and of course, we can turn around and look at the stadium and say, look, what emerged in this beautiful stadium. Willie Waddle got that organised, got it designed in the German Westfalenstadion. So we can look at all the things that emerged from a positive point of view, but don't tell that to any of the families, because there's families that are there. They've lost loved ones as well. So just a tragic situation overall.
Aye, like you say, you probably raised a good point there, because I think that was kind of overseen in a lot of the kind of stuff that happened at New Year's Day. There was talking about how it's kind of Ibrox was revamped and stuff like that, and probably like the families do kind of maybe get forgotten about, because again, like you've the point you made there, the kind of the families being at the top, and the kind of club being at the bottom. I think that's kind of maybe overseen sometimes, but I think it's maybe fitting. Then again, like you say, we've got the John Gregg statue outside the club and stuff like that, and it's nice to see anytime you basically go past Ibrox now, there's a bit of a kind of a wee set of flowers there and stuff like that, and it's just nice to have that kind of there. And it's always going to
be the club have been brilliant all the way through it. Every big anniversary comes around, especially in more recent times, it's remembered. The club spend a lot of time trying to do the right thing, always on it. But I think that the sad thing for the club's point of view as well is that when you look back, there was just a culture around football at that time. You were talking about tens and tens of thousands of people emerging from football grounds up and down the country, not just in Britain, but all over the world. And the culture was, you stand and watch a game, after it you leave, and you go down a stairway, and thousands, hundreds of thousands of people have gone down these stairways in the past. If somebody trips, it becomes different. And the same would happen if you were going down the stairway in any of the stores around Glasgow, and a few people were on it. If somebody trips, then it's obviously going to cause an impact on others. People are not necessarily going to die, but when you've got a lot of people in a stairway, then inevitably things can happen. But very, very tragic, part of our history, obviously. So, but we try and move on from that and take as many positives out and just remember the people that have gone. That's essentially what we've done. You still there, Curtis? Or can I lost you?
We'll stay in the stadium for a wee. Can you hear me now? Can you see me now? We'll stay in the stadium just briefly. David, don't mind. Obviously, one of the famous things about Rangers again is the stadium itself, and even just kind of the front door, the marble staircase, the blue room, such stuff like that as well. But we need to talk about trophies, the trophy room, and even the kind of photos you seen of Stephen Gerrard when he first got announced. People see the pennants and the ceiling and stuff like that, all the trophies, and all the kind of special things in the trophy room you wouldn't maybe necessarily associate with a trophy room, i.e. the bike in the trophy room, the painting of Bill Struth, like we say. And one thing I want to personally ask you about was the Loving Cup, because it's something you always see every New Year's. I take it that must have been left this year. And it's a bit of a personal, kind of a weird question. Have you had a kind of awkward things with the Loving Cup in terms of people not wanting to do it, or people not wanting to partake in the Loving Cup ceremony? Because I think it's a cracking tradition. I know roughly the story, but is there any kind of awkward stories about that?
No. I think one of the great things about Rangers is that we are, you talked about the stadium, the front of the stadium, iconic building, 1928. it was opened, and just such an important part of our history. But we're built in traditions, and we respect our traditions. And there's some traditions that sometimes they fall by the wayside. As one of the directors once said to me a long time ago, we keep the good ones and we lose, the ones that are less good. But by and large, we are a club that's built on traditions, and that sets the standards for us. So the standards themselves that you talked about at the start are part of our traditions. And when it comes to the Loving Cup, it's something that we respected. We were given that back in 1937. Commemorates a mining disaster down there, and it coincided with the coronation of the King. So it was one of 30 cups that were made, and that was given to us by the president of Stoke City at that time. And because we went down there to raise money for the dependents of that disaster, in gratitude, they gave us a cup. But they also said it is a loving cup, and it's there to toast the monarch and to toast football. So the tradition is for it to happen for the first match of the new year every year. And as I was saying right at the beginning, a lot of people, unless they've got initiative, things fall by the wayside. And for probably the vast majority of clubs, they didn't continue a tradition, but we have, because it's important to us. And that's to the credit of our club that we continue to do it. So it's now a really important part of the history, and it's nice when people understand the background to it and see it, and it gives people an opportunity to just respect football and respect the monarchy. So it's a nice tradition to have, and it will continue forevermore, I would think. Every time I've got it out of the cabinet, I panic in case I'm going to drop it. So when I say I'll continue forevermore until somebody drops it. But hopefully that'll never happen, because anytime you see people taking it, they're grasping onto it really firmly.
They're sweating, eh?
They know the value of it.
Aye. But is it whiskey, aye?
Yeah, it used to be champagne, and more recently, over the last 10, 15 years or so, it's been Glenmorangie whiskey and lemonade, which and that's just to make it more palatable for people who normally like whiskey. For people who do like whiskey, it's ridiculous you add lemonade. So I would prefer champagne in it, going back to the original tradition, but champagne is more a thing. So you'll find it. It's quite interesting when it gets passed around to see the reaction. You can understand. You can see the people like whiskey and those that don't. So you can see them screwing up their face if they don't. But it's a nice tradition. A nice tradition.
Aye. So we'll go back into the managers, David, mate, and you mentioned Jock Wallace had 2 spells at the club. He's, I think, within my family, he's well renowned for the kind of grittiness and the kind of steel, the kind of aura of the man. He ended Celtic's tournaments, winning 2 trebles in 3 years. What was your kind of remembrance of Jock Wallace, and what was he to Glasgow Rangers?
Oh, tough guy, really tough guy. The players knew exactly where they stood with him all the time. He was a jungle fighter, and he was determined to get them fit, so they'd be the fittest team in the league. You've heard the Gullen Sands, and run up the sands there. He used to have them running around the pitch as well, and until some of them were physically sick. Oxygen bottles sitting there, for some of them. But in talking to a lot of the players after it, they didn't run up Gullen Sands every week. They did this as pre-season training. So, like 2 weeks of that really hard graft, tough graft. But the big thing about it, and I've spoken to a lot of players about it, is they felt they were the fittest team in the league. So see, when they get into the last 20 minutes, half an hour of a game, they were able to run the legs off of other teams because of that fitness. And that fitness has stuck with many of them right through into their elder years. So big character, man manager, got them believing they could run through a wall. And they all loved him. I mean, he would grab them and hold them up against the wall, and they didn't let him down, But they respected him and they loved him.
Like you say, I think he, obviously before my time, but I've obviously seen a lot of videos on, and it's the one where he's getting interviewed at Hampden by a reporter, and he's getting waiting away. He's like, "Come on," stuff like that. I take it he must have been quite feared, not just the football sense, but even to the media and stuff like that as well, and even to opposition managers as well.
No, I think he's a really nice guy, and I think what you were seeing in that, you saw it before that video. You saw it before the match. We got battle fever on and all that kind of stuff.
Classic.
He just loved Rangers. So the interview at the end when he was, we just won the cup, and he was getting quite irate with the reporter, and I can only interpret this. I never get a chance to ask him why he was like that on that particular day, but I'm pretty certain it'd be because he wanted to go and join his players. He wanted to go and celebrate with them, and this was delaying him. He wanted to go and thank them. That would be the kind of thing. So the players and the club were the be all and end all to him, and obviously when he left Rangers, he still carried a picture of the club on the wall. So it's huge love for the club, and big part of our history as well.
So fast forward to one of probably the most iconic stages in Scottish football. Even David, we'll talk about the Soonest Revolution. He's obviously well known, probably more for his punditry these days, but as a Rangers fan, or even for Rangers family, he's known as probably the guy galvanised the club again in the 80s, leading on till Walter's tenure. But again, what was that period like to be a part of? Because right now, as a Rangers fan, you're getting told it's quite similar to Steven Gerrard, what he's doing now. But what kind of similarities can you see? And is it similar? Was it different in terms of manager skills, or is it?
It's similar. It's similar in some regards. Similar in the impact it's had, and it's created a kind of revolution in itself. Not similar in that Steven is a completely different character for Graham, and Graham Souness arrived as a player manager. He arrived and was given the opportunity to sign top players with a lot of money at his disposal. The top players in England, for example, Terry Butcher, Chris Woods, whatever. And it was fortuitous because English clubs weren't competing in Europe, so there was they were more encouraged to come than they might otherwise have been. If Stephen was to go out and try and get the captain of England just now, for example, then you're talking about tens of millions. So it was different in that sense that the buying power of the club was a lot greater in these days. But in terms of where we are in comparison to that, Stephen has had this huge impact. Again, arrived. Graham didn't have any experience when he came. Stephen didn't have any experience at that level either. Stephen's got this brilliant backroom team. Graham had Walter Smith, but the two are very, very similar characters, and they've got this determination to win, and they're great characters, and they carry such a big following out with the club as well. They're revered by lots of people, players, as well as football fans. So it makes it easier to attract players to the club. When Graham was there, for players who knew Souness as a player and who'd been asked to come to Irish would think, well, if it's good enough for Graham Souness, it's good enough for me. And I think Stephen offers that as well. People look at Steven Gerrard, think, world class player. We all want to be there, want to play under him. So again, that's where the similarities are. But in terms of characters, different. In terms of money, different. But the same impact and inside Ibrox, having been there during Graham's time, because I started 6 weeks after it. Really exciting, really exciting period.
Aye.
Really exciting period. There was only maybe about 6 permanent staff in Ibrox at that time. You've got hundreds now. So again, the club has evolved into the commercial era and all that kind of stuff as well. But the same thing applies. Everybody's just so excited by the progress that the club made then, and obviously where we are now. So, but like all these sort of things, you just take one game at a time, one season at a time. That's what will happen now.
As you said, you were starting the club at the time, David. What was Soonest like on a kind of personal basis with the staffing, like you say? What was
well, I was a bit in awe of him, to be honest, because this guy was, one of the greatest players. I mean, even now he's, some guys just carry himself and they've got this aura about him. And Souness always had this aura about him. He'd done it at the highest level. He was a fantastic player. But he was always, steely determination. A lot of the tactical stuff came more from Walter, but Graham was fiercely determined character, but very courteous. It was a great atmosphere in the club at that time because David Holmes was the chief executive, the chairman at that time, I think he was, managing director initially, and again he'd built up this kind of family atmosphere. So it didn't matter whether it was the tea lady or Terry Butcher. Everybody was treated with great respect and courtesy, and it would build up a really good atmosphere in the ground, and Graham was at the heart of that.
Great. So I want to talk about Souness's departure because he's made quite maybe not a regret of it. Well, we heard him talk about it on like Sky Sports, whatever, and he spoke about how he maybe took it too late. Maybe it was a regret of maybe even leaving Rangers to go to Liverpool at that time as such. And we're seeing now kind of, again, talk about Steven Gerrard, maybe one day being Liverpool manager. How did the loss of Souness, maybe how was it took? Was it, because obviously Walter Smith took over and made it pretty seamless in terms of success and stuff like that. Was there maybe a panic about the club at the time because we're losing Graham Souness, or was it seamless as it seems looking back?
Looking back, it was seamless. At the time, it was a bit of a shock, really. There was always a kind of concern he might go, but looking back, it was a nice transition. I think the uncertainty the club had, or a lot of the fans had at that time, was they knew Walter as an assistant. They didn't know him as a manager. A lot of people thought, Walter's a bit quieter, maybe a bit softer, and so he won't carry the same kind of aura as Souness. In actual fact, that was the biggest load of rubbish ever, because I had seen Walter in Ibrox tearing a strip off of one of the maintenance guys before a match, because he reckoned the ground wasn't being presented for the first game of the season as it should be, and a lot of things that should have been done weren't done. And he had the fingers in the face of the guy, and I thought, when I saw Walter at that time, I thought, up to then what you're seeing is this nice, apparently mild-mannered guy, quiet chap, but get Walter into that environment of a dressing room, and if he's not happy with you, you'll know about it. And unfortunately, I've not been in that situation, but I know a lot of players that have been, and so it was a great transition for us, because Graham moved on. He was having his problems with discipline, the media and the SFA particularly, and so it was probably a good time for him to move on from our perspective. But certainly with Walter coming through, it was a start of another great era.
Aye. Before we actually speak about Walter, we need to wish him well, because obviously the news last few days in recovering in hospital, and hopefully he gets back to a speedy recovery. Hope it's not too long for him. But again, this is the kind of the era where I'm probably most excited about, because this is where I started growing up as a Rangers fan, stuff like that. But again, a personal kind of view and the club, David, how was that what was that like again for the club, and what was the kind of memories again? Maybe obviously we all know about 9-0 and stuff like that, but is that maybe kind of the fondest kind of time in your kind of Rangers supporting life, the 9-0 era? Because again, not only the stats and stuff like that of 9-0 and the success we had, but the players we had at the club, Brian Laudrup, Paul Gascoigne, even Ali McCoist, it goes on and on and on. That is basically what Rangers was to me growing up, and what I remember, like we spoke about earlier on, your memories growing up. But again, just maybe your take on it, mate.
It's a really hard one to answer, Curtis, because I've got so many. I mean, obviously during the bad years, you know, when the club was going through all its troubles, that wasn't a pleasant time. Because we had to still do our job and still, you know, you knew there were a lot of things happening in the background, and you're dealing with people who are your bosses, and you've got to respect them. I mean, there were a lot of good people come in as well. You know, the chief executive at the time, Graham, what was his second name? I can't remember. But he was a really nice guy. So there were some nice people around the club at that time. But obviously, people who had more interested potentially in themselves. But as far as the 90s was, the 80s and the 90s were a great time because I just started with the club, meeting all these big stars. A lot of nice people at the club as well. You know, it's not just about the players. It's, you know, there are a lot of nice staff as well. You get transitions, things change, new owners come in, new managers come in through the Advocat period. Again, different era. Again, great players. It's all been good, Curtis. Today, nowadays, you know, I've kind of watched players maturing to a certain extent. You know, you get the likes of Tav coming in and maturing into what he is at the moment. You know, young guys like Aribo coming in and Kamara, and watch them maturing. You know, it's and even the management team, you know, working, building towards where they are at the moment. It's the whole thing has been a great journey, and lots of individual memories of different periods. But you know, I don't think I could pick out one and say that was my favourite. It's just been a whole thing is great, you know.
Well, I'll ask you about 9-0 then, the night Richard Gough lifted the trophy. What was the memories around about them and it was secure and stuff like that? And then a wee double end of this question, what about the 10-0 season? What was that summed up for yourself? How was that for you?
This season? Or the 10-0 season? 10-0 season was very, very disappointing for a number of viewpoints. The 9 was just a momentum we had carried forward. A lot of pressure on the players. I was hoping that would have told in Celtic earlier than it did. But a lot of pressure on the players, because I remember talking to the guys and saying, you know, and particularly the likes of Walter, who'd always highlighted, if you win 8, but you don't win 9, you just wasted it, you know. So there was pressure every year. It was building that they had to win the 9. And of course, when you get to the 10, and Celtic have experienced that this year as well. I think Celtic will claim they've been unlucky this year, and I think they have in a lot of ways. We know the COVID thing and all that. But then again, there's momentum that takes place, and we've got a momentum at the moment. And I think for me, the unfortunate thing about the 10 was that we didn't have the centre half that we wanted to have. We wanted Amoruso. He could arrive with an injury, so Walter never got the benefit of him. You know, going forward, he'd signed the Italian players, of course. He'd signed Jonas Tern, who arrived and was injured. So a lot of the great players he signed, if they had been fit, and you know, then we would have done it. And then, of course, we had a big lead. We had a big lead as well.
Aye.
I remember as, you know, and then we lose Marco Negri, you know, after he scored a barload of goals. I remember us losing a goal at Celtic Park in the 6 or 7 minute of injury time when I couldn't see any more than 2 minutes. You know, that gave them a draw. There were a lot of things like that. And then, of course, we sold Gaza, which I think was a big mistake. We sold Gaza. So, you know, all the signs were wrong. and then Walter had announced that he was leaving at the end of the year. So everything was, and then Laudrup was going to go down to Chelsea. So it was as if everything was starting to unfold. Richard had left by that time as well. So everything was starting to unfold. And really, when you wanted to continue the momentum, it was all starting to break up. And then the final straw that broke the camel's back was the cup final against Hearts. We didn't play well, but they got a dodgy penalty, and then right in the last few minutes, we had a chance to equalise. McCoy's was brought down on the line, which is a penalty. The referee gave it. The referee gave it outside. Outside, but that was a penalty. And in fact, even the fourth official that day said on the line is a penalty. So it was to my mind, it was a refereeing error. Hearts, good luck to Hearts, went away with the cup. But for us, that was the last game played by a good few of the guys. So it was the end of a very disappointing season. But we could easily have done. We could have and we should have done 10. We should have. But they'll be saying the same.
Aye. They will be. Aye. The most.
So I don't know that any of our fans ever got a Terry Monroe tattoo, mind you.
No, I'm sure. But, as you come to that end of that kind of successful era, we're coming on to the Dick Advocate era, and the kind of this. It was I don't know if it was like inside the club, David, but what it seemed from the outside as a fan as well, that this kind of not obsession, but this kind of aim towards European football was that the ultimate kind of downfall of what ended up happening years down the line? Because even when McLeish came in and stuff like that, he was working in a budget and stuff like that as well, and the club ended up, what happened. But at the time, like I say, this as a Rangers fan growing up, this was my kind of first Champions League kind of memory, stuff like that. You're watching some great players for Rangers and come Ibrox. And as much as we didn't really do well, we had, like, I remember the kind of Sturm Graz games when we beat them, was it 5-1 at Ibrox, 5-0 and stuff like that. Billy Dodds chipped the goalie. That was, and even things like Barry Ferguson, him become the captain, that kind of era of Dick Advocate. Looking back, that 2-3 years, the success he had was good, but do you think that had a lasting impact on the club as it's maybe thought?
Yeah. It's I remember when we did run into a financial bother, and we had to, like Alan McLeish the club as a whole had to start cutting back, and its expenditure, couldn't take on players, people like Arthur Newman who, ended up just giving up football, players that you'd have wanted to keep, whatever. Had to cut the wage bill quite markedly. So we did suffer the consequences. We still managed to win the championship, obviously. Sure.
Yeah,
Alec as well, of course. Memorable championship in particular. but we were suffering a bit from that era when we were looking for European success, and it's tough getting European success because you look at the players that you would need to get you up to win the Champions League, for example, and you're playing against teams. I mean, even if you look at our team now, people like Kamara that cost us 50,000. What's he worth now? So you're playing against teams that have already got players that they've brought in for 50 million or something like that. We've already put teams out of Europe that have been spending that kind of money. So
exactly.
So, but you're up against that all the time, and the further and further you into the Champions League, for example, then the better the quality. You're playing against the Messis and whatever, the Ronaldos and all that kind of stuff. They're worth hundreds of millions. So PSG. So it's tough to try and buy success unless you've got an Abramovich behind you.
Aye, you're right. So, like you touched on McLeish there, mate. So, do you think he gets credit for what he done in the club? Because I think now, him as a manager, he gets a bit of rough time because he's most recent Scotland stint. But you look back, like you say, he was working on quite well, hands behind his back, basically, of some of the things he was doing. But he won a treble and brought some of the most memorable days a Rangers fan I can remember anyway, in terms of the two last day trophy wins, Helicopter Sunday. Even his first trophy was the Scottish Cup final, Ferguson's free kick, Longcrank's header. That's probably one of my most favourite Rangers games.
Yeah.
But that was the kind of transition from Africa to McLeish, because obviously he came in during the season. But do you think McLeish got the credit, or gets the credit as he does as a Rangers manager, considering?
I hope he does. He certainly deserves it, because he did win silverware, and he did manage the club through a difficult time, because say we were cutting the wage bill all the time. So he couldn't operate at the same level as Advocat, and he lost some of the key players and had to rebuild to a certain extent as well. So no, I would hope he gets the credit, because when he certainly won it, and one of the you talked about that iconic cup final, and then of course the say Helicopter Sunday. You know, these are big events in the club's history. So yeah, I would hope Alec will be. It'll be well remembered in Rangers history by the fans.
We'll ask you about the second Helicopter Sunday, the Helicopter Sunday for me, Easter Road. What's your memories, David, of that day? For me, I'd given up hope, to be honest with you. I remember my mum and dad took me out a walk and stuff like that, took me for a McDonald's, and I was listening to the car on the radio, and then Peter Martin, Scott McDonald scores, whatever, and I couldn't believe I'm talking about the back of the motor and all that. And my dad's like, calm down, Celtic will score. Whatever, they always do. And Scott McDonald scored again. He's like, fuck it. Just one of the best days, you go home and it's on the telly, and then straight away your dad's like, we'll take you to the Ibrox, see the team and stuff like that, and just memorable days. I think that was, I think the best thing about it was because it wasn't, well, for me, it was unexpected. I thought you always hope, don't you? And Big Marvin Andrews had the whole slogan, keep believing, stuff like that. But for me, I think that's probably the best game I've ever seen, because it was just totally unexpected. What about yourself, David?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the great things about football. That things do happen. But we've seen it this season as well. You know, some of the turnaround with not so much us, because we've been pretty consistent, fairly steady. But you see the likes of how things have turned with Celtic, for example. You know, and so it's just, when you've watched football for as long as me, that's one of the big attractions, is how it can be a wee bit unpredictable. Aye. And these are the kind of days that make things very special, when you think you've lost them, and then as Big Marvin says, keep believing. And that's got to be it. That's what hopefully fires every team up, especially our teams, is that even if you think you're down, just keep fighting away to the end, because you never know what's going to happen. So but I think we've got that kind of group of players that are determined. You've seen it in a lot of European performances, particularly this year. We're just stuck in there. You lose a goal, but you go on and you've got confidence you're going to pull it back again. So that's just football, isn't it?
Aye, that's it. So, what's happening there? Still there, guys? Aye. I don't know what's happened there. Yeah. Sorted. Right, so I think after that we come into kind of more modern kind of era and Rangers stuff like that. With Paul Le Guen, the whole kind of disaster there with him and guys like Philip Sebo and stuff like that. Otter Smith goes back in, steadies the ship and stuff like that. The whole run with Manchester, and brings back 3 titles in a row. We then come on to the kind of demise of the club, stuff like that. We don't need to go into details of because everybody kind of knows what happened, stuff like that. But in terms of the journey, David, how do you look back on it as a fan? I mean, obviously, people say we shouldn't be there and should be there, stuff like that. But when you see the way it's panned out, in terms of the way Celtic might fell away, and the fact Rangers have been so dominant now as well, I wouldn't say it's worth it, but it's maybe had a kind of fairy tale kind of ending. If you were to put it in a film, it probably would be the kind of only thing it's missing, obviously the fans. But in terms of the fact that Rangers came back so strong now, and Celtic have probably been back a couple of years now, how do you look back on the journey back now? And have you got any memories of maybe being at some of these wee kind of smaller clubs or stuff like that, or even then come to Ibrox?
No, I think the thing we need to remember is that we've got to where we are this season because we've been pretty humble. You'll see that with Stephen, even his press conference today as well. You respect your opposition. especially when you're playing against the likes of Slavia or Celtic. You respect them because they're good teams, and you don't look too far. You just look at one game at a time. Basically, that's the way things. The club have never allowed themselves to get ahead of it. I've watched, lots of social media things or whatever, and people getting ahead and saying we're going to win 55 and all that kind of stuff. And you think, well, yeah, okay, I think pretty good chance we will. But as we said earlier on, things can turn around very quickly in football. So
yeah,
I think the attitude this year has been great. It's just to keep our head down, go on with it. So it's I think Scott Arfield said today as well. We've got we've got one part of this season tucked away, whatever. Still lots to play for. Next year will be a new start. We've still got to go for the Scottish Cup. We're still in Europe. Just keep doing what we do and see where it takes us, whatever. And it'll be the same next year. We'll start, a clean slate again. Celtic will be determined to come back again. So it's not the end of a journey. It's another stage in the journey.
Good way to put it.
But after not having the championship for 10 years, it's no surprise that everybody's euphoric, from the players to the staff and to the fans. It's completely understandable, especially in this situation, this pandemic situation, where people are looking for something to give them a lift. So it's great, but as I say, it's not. I wouldn't want to talk about it as the end of the journey by any stretch of the imagination. It's a big important stage, and we'll see where it takes us from here.
Good way of putting it, mate. Aye. So in terms of, I remember Dave King talking a couple of years ago about, because we're coming up to the 150th anniversary next year.
Yeah.
And those kind of plans or whatever the club are going to do. Do you know of anything you can maybe tell us, or any exclusive you can maybe tell us, mate?
No, I can't. I wouldn't tell you exclusives. No, I wouldn't give you exclusives. No, I think what's commonly known is what's commonly known is that we're building a museum. I've been involved in that fairly heavily, and I've seen the results of that. And they've got a great team and pulling it together. Very professional team. I don't mean necessarily football fans. We're really professional folk and designers and all that kind of stuff. So that's the plans for that look superb. I think the fans will love that, and that'll be released in due course. But no, the club is the club's very much focused on 150. It's not only 150th anniversary; it's the 50th anniversary of the Barcelona victory as well, of course.
Oh right, that's right. Aye.
So there's going to be a lot to celebrate, and it's just nice that we're going to get into that year as champions.
Aye.
As a bit extra to it. So from that point of view, it should be a really good year. Looking forward to it.
Will you be full time in the club then, in the museum every single day? No, doing 40 hours a week in the museum. Nah, you.
Yeah, no, it just seems that way sometimes. It's I'm just part time, and I'm just doing various bits and pieces. I'm writing a book at the moment as well. So, it's a good time to be a Rangers fan. It's always a good time to be a Rangers fan, but particularly because of what's happened this year, it's a good time. So we just hope it lasts for a bit longer, of course.
Fingers crossed, David. David, absolute pleasure to have you on, mate. Honestly, I loved that. That was, because I could probably sit and talk to you all day about the club and had a few pints with you, but hopefully again, like you say, you can maybe do it again soon, mate.
Get back on. No, well, best of luck, and thanks for inviting me on to the first one. I hope it's a success for you guys. I've enjoyed the blather. That's really what it's all about. Mate. So
that's it.
Just keep believing. Is that Marvin was saying?
That's it, David,